As you probably know, some of the older cameras that are out there have got some very special sensors in them that give them a unique rendering and a unique look. But on the other hand, there's a lot of new cameras with some really nice features on them coming out at the moment. And a lot of the time we can look at the latest mirrorless cameras and say, yeah, I want those features. But we can also look at some of those older cameras and say, yeah, I want those older sensors and that older rendering and look. So how do we balance out these wants and needs? In this video, I'm going to tell you why you should consider some of the older camera bodies, but I'm also going to tell you why you should consider the newer ones as well. What we see most of online, on YouTube, in blogs and so on, is photographers that we like to follow constantly upgrading to new gear all the time. And this can make a lot of new users feel that you need that gear in order to produce work like they do. Here's the first statement I want to make about that. When you look at photographers and they improve their cameras when they get the next new mirrorless camera, their work does not get better. Their portfolio looks exactly the same as it did before. It's not improving. I remember a wedding photographer that I knew online photographing a wedding. When he moved over to mirrorless, he was using the silent shutter on there, and he put up a picture online and he said, I couldn't have got this picture with my old DSLRs. I could only do this with mirrorless with a silent shutter. And it was a moment of the bride hugging someone and that person was in tears. His statement was he couldn't have got this shot without a silent shutter. Yet this same type of picture was throughout his portfolio, and it's also throughout pretty much every other wedding photographer's portfolio. But he felt that there was something special about that moment, that in this instance he could only get it with a silent shutter. And I've seen this statement repeated across wedding photography many times. I've seen many photographers go to mirrorless and say I couldn't have got the shot without this, yet their portfolio is full of that same type of picture all the way through it, and people have been taking that type of picture for decades. So this idea that we can only get a certain type of shot with a mirrorless camera is obviously nonsense. We know that because there's no new type of photography that's only done on mirrorless cameras. It doesn't exist. And you need to keep this in your mind when you're looking at these things. Don't just get sucked into spending all your money for no reason on something. But now I want to talk about the upside of mirrorless cameras. That they feel that they're doing a better job with their mirrorless cameras when their portfolios don't demonstrate it. And it comes down to this. The key thing with mirrorless is that you can see that you've got the shot before you take it. You know that the focus, when it says it's in focus, is going to be in focus. You can also see the exposure and white balance and everything else before you take the picture. What that does is it confirms to you that you've got it right before you've even done it. And the benefit of that is that it removes the stress from the situation. And when you take the stress out of the situation, it feels like you're getting the job done easily. Because our perception of pressure is everything, even if it's a hobby. I can imagine shooting a wedding now with the mirrorless cameras that are out now would be very, very low stress compared to doing it on a DSLR. It would just be so much easier and I'd feel like things were taken care of. But I wouldn't expect my work to change, and it shouldn't. Why wouldn't it change? Because always the same thing, and I know I always say this, you still have to be at the right place, at the right time. You have to recognize the moment. You have to recognize and get the correct composition. You have to press the button at the right time. And that is the core of photography, and that's never, ever going to change. It's just not changing. Think about it like this. If you can't shoot a wedding on a 5D Mark II successfully from start to finish, then you're not a good photographer. That's you. You need to work on just basic photography skills. The only thing that's going to change if you shoot it on a Canon R5 or an R6 is that you're going to feel more confident in the process of doing it because you know whether you've got the shots beforehand. You can say all you want about, yeah, but I did this. There are wedding photographers who will smoke you on a 5D Mark II. And those weddings have already been shot. They're out there. Go and look for wedding photography on a 5D Mark II. There is stunning stuff that will stand up to anyone who's doing any work now. So that brings me back to that point. When that same photographer uses a mirrorless camera, the only thing it's going to realistically do for them is take away a large chunk of the stress. And then people will say, yes, but low light and all this stuff, it's all been done. It's all been done on those old cameras. There's nothing that exists today on mirrorless cameras that wasn't done on cameras like the 5D Mark II or a D800 or anything like that. It's all been shot. That's the reality of it. Where does this leave it for you though? What should you do? Well, here's the thing. I think there's a lot of advantage to owning both mirrorless cameras and the older cameras as well. My preference for portrait photography will almost always be to shoot it on a 5D Mark I or a 5D Mark II or a 6D Mark I. Outside of medium format, that's basically my favourite gear to use for portrait photography. That's unlikely to change unless one of the camera companies come along with a sensor that I feel provides the same benefits that those cameras do. But for other types of photography, landscape photography, wedding photography, even wildlife photography, all of those different genres, maybe for you, it might be a nicer experience shooting it on a mirrorless camera. I know for certain that I definitely prefer to shoot landscapes on mirrorless cameras. The benefits of the tilt screens and being able to see what I'm doing properly just makes my life easier. I can do exactly the same thing on older cameras, it's just a nicer experience doing it on the newer ones. And if I was going to shoot a wedding now, if someone said, hey, can you shoot my wedding? I think I'd prefer the results in the 5D Mark I, but I think I'd prefer the experience on a new mirrorless camera. And that would be my choice. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's always subjective. It's up to you. You should do whatever's right for you. Don't feel like you have to try and keep up with what other photographers are doing. Don't go and buy something because somebody else is telling you to buy. Don't even listen to me on the 5D Mark I. Make your own minds up for yourselves. If you think, yeah, what he's saying makes sense to me, I want to try it out, go and try it. If you want to go and get an R5 or something like that, go and try that as well. It's all fine. And there's no problem with owning both at the same time. And that's really my point. You should own those cameras. You may even have more than two systems. A lot of the professional photographers that I know, like myself, own more than one camera system because they buy specific cameras for specific things. For instance, if you want to shoot an 85mm 1.2, you're kind of limited to which cameras can do that. But you may prefer certain lenses from other systems for other jobs, so you buy a camera body and a lens from that system. Yes, it adds up and gets expensive, but if you're a professional photographer, then these are tools that you use. I don't want to see anyone blowing budgets or maxing out credit cards or anything like that to buy different camera gear, because these are tools. They do have different looks, they do have different ways of doing things. Some things make our lives easier in certain respects, but it always comes down to the same thing, that you're the photographer. The look of your images might change from camera to camera, but the content is always going to be what comes from you, and that doesn't change. So in the end, certain cameras and certain lenses suit certain jobs better than others. But you're not buying photography skills when you get a camera. You're buying certain tools and assistance modes and things like that in the camera, or certain looks, you know, a certain lens, a certain sensor combination, those kinds of things. That's what you're really after. If this video was useful for you, consider buying me a coffee in the link in the description. It really does help me out and it would be much appreciated. And if you want to know which of the older camera systems I recommend that I think have got a classic look to them, a unique rendering, check out this video over here.